Laken Snelling.
Laken Snelling.
Laken Snelling.
Laken Snelling.
Laken Snelling.
Friday, April 10th, 2026. A former University of Kentucky student stands in a Lexington courtroom for just a few minutes, says almost nothing, and pleads not guilty to first-degree manslaughter in the death of her newborn child. By that point, the case had already pulled in national attention, not just because of the charge, but because of what investigators say happened before anyone even knew a baby had been born. According to court filings and multiple news reports, this case goes back to late August 2025, when police say roommates at an off-campus home heard strange noises coming from Laken Snelling's room. Later, they noticed blood. Then they found something no one in that house was expecting to find: a newborn boy, dead in a closet. Investigators say the baby had been wrapped and placed in trash bags. The medical examiner later concluded that the child had been born alive and that the cause of death was asphyxia by undetermined means. And that is where this story becomes so hard to look away from. Because from the outside, this did not look like the kind of case anyone saw coming. Laken Snelling had been described in coverage as a former UK student athlete and cheerleader. But behind closed doors, prosecutors say something happened in that bedroom that set off a criminal case now moving deeper into court. And to understand why this case has become such a lightning rod, you have to go back to the day police say everything changed. According to investigators, the case began on August 27, 2025, inside Snelling's off-campus home in Lexington. Police say her roommates heard loud noises coming from her bedroom early that morning. After that, they noticed blood and began asking questions. Reporting says Snelling allegedly told them she had passed out and needed medical attention. But as the situation unfolded, the roommates became suspicious enough to search further. That is when, according to police and court records cited by local and national outlets, the baby was discovered in the closet. The child was found wrapped and placed inside trash bags. Officers were called. Snelling was taken to a hospital. And almost immediately, the case shifted from private shock to public investigation. What makes this part of the story so gripping is how fast it seems to have escalated. One moment, this was a college house with roommates trying to make sense of a weird morning. The next, homicide investigators were involved. A newborn was dead, and every detail inside that room suddenly mattered. But at that stage, one huge question still hung over everything. Was the baby stillborn, or had he been born alive? Because the answer to that one question would change the entire case. In many cases like this, the timeline is important. But here, the autopsy may have been even more important. Early reporting focused on the initial charges: abuse of a corpse, tampering with physical evidence, and concealing the birth of an infant. Serious charges, yes, but not the charge that would later dominate headlines. That came after the medical examiner's findings became public. According to reporting from WKYT, People, and Court TV, the autopsy found that the newborn had been born alive. The listed cause of death was asphyxia by undetermined means. That wording matters. It does not publicly answer every question. It does not, by itself, tell the full story of exactly how the child died, but it does move the case into a completely different category because it gave prosecutors a basis to argue that this was no longer only about concealment after the fact, and that is exactly what happened next. In March 2026, a Fayette County grand jury indicted Snelling on an additional charge: first-degree manslaughter. The indictment kept the earlier charges in place too, but this new count changed the temperature of the case overnight. It signaled that prosecutors believed they could now argue criminal responsibility for the baby's death itself, not just for what happened after. That was the turning point. Because once the manslaughter charge was added, this was no longer just a disturbing campus-adjacent mystery. It became a case about intent, action, and what can actually be proved in court. And that brings us to the part of the story where every word matters. What Snelling allegedly told investigators. According to court filings described by multiple outlets, investigators say Snelling admitted she gave birth alone in her bedroom. From there, reports describe slightly different versions of what happened next, but the core allegation is consistent. Snelling allegedly told investigators she gave birth by herself, that she either passed out or fell asleep, and later found the baby unresponsive. According to those reports, she then placed the baby and the placenta into a trash bag and tried to clean the scene. That is the heart of the prosecution's public theory so far. Not because every detail has already been tested in court, but because those allegations, combined with the autopsy result, are what appear to have pushed the case toward manslaughter. Still, there is a major difference between what investigators believe and what prosecutors can prove beyond a reasonable doubt. And that is where this case gets even more complicated. Because the public has seen fragments, arrest records, charging documents, short court appearances, news summaries. But none of that is the same thing as a full trial. None of it is the same thing as cross-examined evidence. And that gap is exactly where the defense lives. At this point, the case is not about whether the story is shocking. Everyone already knows it is. The real question is whether prosecutors can connect every piece tightly enough to convince a jury what happened, how it happened, and whether Snelling's actions meet the legal standard for first-degree manslaughter. And just when the case seemed to settle into that posture, another detail kept drawing attention: who Laken Snelling was before any of this happened. Some cases stay local. This one did not. Part of that is the allegation itself. Part of it is the age of the accused, but part of it is also image. Reporting repeatedly identified Snelling as a former University of Kentucky student athlete and cheerleader, and some outlets described her as a beauty queen as well. That contrast between public image and criminal allegation turned this into the kind of story that spreads fast online, where people often decide what they think before a case ever reaches trial. Then there is the timeline after her initial arrest. Snelling was originally arrested in 2025 and later released on bond. Reporting says she has been on house arrest at her father's home in Tennessee with an electronic monitor, and that after the March 2026 indictment, she was brought back to Kentucky, where another cash bond was posted. Coverage also says she has withdrawn from the University of Kentucky. Each of those details added more fuel to the public reaction because to some people, the idea that someone facing allegations like this could be out of jail at all felt impossible to accept. But the court system does not run on outrage. It runs on procedure. And procedure is exactly what we saw on April 10th, 2026, when Snelling appeared in court and entered a not guilty plea to the manslaughter charge. It was brief. There was no dramatic speech, no public explanation, just another legal marker in a case that is still very much alive, which raises the next big question. If she is now pleaded not guilty, what happens next and where is this case actually headed? The recent update is simple but important. On April 10, 2026, Snelling pleaded not guilty to the manslaughter charge during a short court appearance in Fayette County. She had already pleaded not guilty earlier to the other charges: abuse of a corpse, tampering with physical evidence, and concealing the birth of an infant. So at least for now, the defense position is clear across the board. As of the latest reports, the next court dates are set for May 14th and June 12th. Outlets have described those as a pre-trial or preliminary hearing and a later status hearing, depending on the report, but the key point is the same. This case is moving forward, and the April plea was not an ending. It was really the start of the next phase. And that next phase is where the story usually changes. Because once a case moves past the headline stage, it gets less emotional and more technical. The public wants a clean answer right away. Court does not work like that. Court slows everything down. It asks what can be documented, what can be challenged, what was said, when it was said, whether those statements were consistent, how the medical evidence will be interpreted, and whether the prosecution's theory really holds together once defense attorneys start pulling at every thread. That is why the most important chapter of this case may still be ahead. Right now, most people know the shocking version of the story, the version built from the affidavit, the arrest, the autopsy summary, and the plea hearing. But trials are where stories get stress tested, and when that happens, details that once looked solid can get stronger, weaker, or far messier than the public first assumed. So for now, the case sits in an uneasy place. The allegations are severe. The plea is not guilty. The child is still gone. And the system is now moving one hearing at a time toward whatever comes next. What makes the Laken Snelling case so gripping is not just the allegation. It is the collision between secrecy, timing, image, and uncertainty. A newborn is found dead. Investigators say the child was born alive. A grand jury adds a manslaughter charge. Then, months later, the woman at the center of it all stands in court and says, "Not guilty." That does not answer the biggest question in the case. It sharpens it. Because now, this is no longer just about what police say happened in a bedroom in August 2025. It is about what the state can prove in a courtroom in 2026. And until that happens, this case will stay suspended between two realities. The one prosecutors are building, and the one the defense is preparing to fight. That is why this story is not over, not even close. Thank you for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe for more stories and future updates.